In this story, a quiet lunch in an elegant café turns into a whirlwind of suspicion and unexpected heroism. Amid the clinking of silverware and soft jazz music, a wealthy patron may lose everything or be saved by someone society left behind. The truth emerges from the most unlikely source, proving that true courage can appear in even the darkest of moments. A warm glow fell across the polished marble floors inside one of Manhattan's most exclusive cafes, the Elm and Porter. Soft jazz music floated through the lofty interior, mingling with the quiet conversation of well-dressed patrons. Rich walnut tables, each meticulously set with crisp white linens, seemed to sparkle under chandeliers shaped like elegant teardrops. It was exactly the kind of place you'd expect to find Bernard Hutchinson, an elderly millionaire known for his numerous real estate investments and philanthropic contributions around the city. That afternoon, he entered wearing a tailored charcoal suit that complemented his refined posture. Even as he neared 75, Bernard carried himself with a calm dignity. His steady gait and focused blue eyes spoke of a man used to controlling every aspect of his life. Trailing a step behind him was his young wife, Marissa Hutchinson, a striking woman in her late 20s with flawlessly styled blonde hair and subtle diamond earrings that hinted at the wealth she had married into. Their table, reserved near the central window, offered a view of Fifth Avenue's ceaseless rhythm. Pedestrians bustled by, taxis honked, and tourists snapped photos of iconic buildings towering above. Bernard sat with his back straight, scanning the luncheon menu for his favorite soup of the day, a classic chicken and vegetable broth the cafe was known for. Meanwhile, Marissa discreetly looked around, her eyes glancing beyond the glass at the crowds moving outside, as though she were waiting for something or someone. Little did anyone realize that beneath the poised surface of this lunchtime routine, dark intentions simmered in Marissa's mind. She smiled sweetly at her husband whenever he caught her eye, but the warmth on her lips never quite reached her gaze. Bernard, preoccupied with deciding on an appetizer, noticed nothing unusual and assumed Marissa was just pensive. It had been a busy season. Business deals, social events, and a recent hospital scare that left him feeling weaker than usual. In a way, Bernard was relieved to be out for a pleasant meal, hopeful for a quiet moment with his wife. A waitress arrived with water glasses and fresh bread. Bernard politely asked for the soup of the day, while Marissa ordered a garden salad, a tight-lipped smile suggesting she was not particularly hungry. A mild tension crackled between them, though its exact origin remained unclear to the staff. This was New York, after all, and every table in the Elm and Porter likely held its own secrets and ambitions. Outside the cafe's window, someone else was watching. Leaning near the entrance was Malik, a boy of perhaps 13 with rumpled jeans and sneakers that had seen better days. He was no stranger to the harsh conditions of living on the streets. Most days, he found what warmth he could in the nooks of subway stations or in shelters when space was available. Occasional kindnesses, like a free sandwich from a sympathetic cafe employee, were the small lifelines that got him through each day. As dusk approached, Malik would often fade into the maze of city shadows, fending for himself. Now, however, the early afternoon light illuminated something he saw through the broad front windows. He had spotted Marissa's quick, furtive gesture over Bernard's steaming bowl of soup. From the outside, it merely looked like she had sprinkled some seasoning, but Malik sensed something sinister in how hastily she moved her hand away. Another waitress approached, and Marissa flashed a charming smile, slipping the small vial back into her designer purse. There was a moment, just an instant, when Malik saw her eyes dart left and right, as if making sure no one else noticed. Intrigue had arrived at the Elm and Porter, though Bernard remained blissfully unaware. For the moment, the cafe retained its refined calm. Silverware clinked, discreet laughter rose from adjacent tables, and the scent of fresh thyme lingered in the air. Marissa's lip curled in a private smirk as she watched Bernard pick up his spoon. Meanwhile, beyond the thick glass, Malik stood frozen on the sidewalk. The question that fluttered through his mind was simple. Would anyone believe him if he burst in and warned the old man? Did he dare risk the humiliation, or possibly the anger of the staff, by shouting an outlandish accusation? Before this moment, Malik's life had been a series of near-invisible struggles. Each morning, he woke up to the reality of not knowing where his next meal would come from, or whether a shelter bed would be available for the night. At an age when most boys are preoccupied with sports, video games, or hanging out at the mall, Malik was consumed with surviving day to day. He knew the city's back alleys, the soup kitchen's schedules, and which corners might yield a few generous passers-by. Malik's circumstances had forced him to develop sharp instincts. He could sense danger, a skill he had learned the hard way when confronted by older kids in the shelter who claimed his jacket or shoes for themselves. His eyes absorbed every detail of the city's constant motion, from security cameras perched atop convenience stores to the worn sneakers of a potential threat approaching. The same instincts now told him that Marissa's action was anything but innocent. The boy took a step forward, the hum of city traffic swirling around him. Wealthy people in suits brushed past, scarcely aware of his existence. He noticed a policeman across the street, but to Malik's mind, approaching law enforcement with a tale of potential poisoning in a fancy café seemed far-fetched. He imagined the officer's immediate skepticism, the condescending dismissal, if not outright hostility. Yet the image of Bernard about to consume that suspicious seasoning weighed on Malik's conscience. With each passing second, Bernard edged closer to tasting his soup. A pang of uncertainty coursed through Malik's chest. He remembered an incident from years ago, back when he still lived with his mother in a cramped studio apartment. She had always told him, "If something's wrong, you can't ignore it. Speak up, even if no one wants to listen." Though life had thrown countless hardships at him since losing that safe home, her words still echoed in his mind. With a tight swallow, he made a decision. Pushing open the cafe door, he felt the sudden change in atmosphere. The cool, air-conditioned interior and the aroma of fresh bread replaced the gritty air outside. Conversations dipped as patrons glanced up at the unexpected newcomer. Malik's heart hammered. He could sense the staff's discomfort at the sight of a homeless boy. A manager near the front gave him a wary look. Meanwhile, Bernard, seated under the gentle glow of a hanging lamp, prepared to take his first taste of the soup. Malik ignored the suspicious glares. He had no plan except to shout a warning. His voice broke through the cafe's refined hush, carrying every ounce of urgency and dread he felt inside. "Don't eat that, sir. Don't eat the soup." For a split second, the hush became complete silence. Dozens of eyes turned toward him, and confusion spread across faces. Bernard paused, spoon midway to his lips. His eyebrows arched, uncertain whether the boy was just a troublemaker or genuinely terrified of something. Marissa, though startled, reacted swiftly. She stood from her seat, outrage and disdain dripping from her voice. "Who are you? And what do you think you're doing? Get out of here!" She looked around for cafe staff, her eyes narrowing at the manager who now hurried forward to intervene. Bernard set his spoon down, meeting Malik's gaze. In that moment, something about the boy's desperation stirred a vague concern in the older man. Bernard asked calmly, "What's this about?" Malik pointed at the soup. She put something in it." He felt foolish saying the words out loud, knowing how absurd they might sound. Part of him expected the entire restaurant to burst into laughter. Instead, quiet, skeptical murmurs rippled across the room. Marissa, quickly regaining her composure, fixed her furious stare on Malik. Her voice turned smooth and dismissive, the tone of someone accustomed to having her word accepted. Ridiculous. Is this a prank? Someone call the police. This boy has no right to barge in here, accusing people of such things. The cafe manager cleared his throat nervously, not sure how to handle this outburst. He looked at Bernard, then at Marissa, trying to gauge the situation. Bernard held up a hand, signaling that he wanted no interruptions. In the hushed tension, the only sound was the steady hum of the cafe's cooling system. For the first time, Marissa seemed genuinely worried that her husband might listen to the boy. She forced a brittle laugh. Bernard, don't tell me you're taking this nonsense seriously. He's probably hungry or desperate for attention. Let's not make a scene. Despite the chaos of the moment, Malik noticed that Marissa refused to meet Bernard's eyes. Everything about her body language screamed unease. Bernard studied her face. His wife's panic was too tightly coiled for it to be mere indignation. The hush deepened as other patrons watched, some leaning forward in curiosity. Nobody was entirely sure whom to believe. A homeless kid barging in with an accusation of poisoning, or a polished woman with a poised demeanor. Moments stretched like pulled taffy, tension thick in the air. Bernard's mind whirred with conflicting thoughts. On the one hand, the entire situation felt surreal. Why would Marissa do something so drastic as to poison him, especially in a public place? They had their marital squabbles, but nothing that hinted at this level of malice. On the other hand, the boy's sincerity was visible in every tremor of his voice. Marissa, sensing her husband's hesitation, let out an exasperated sigh. What do I have to do to get rid of this nonsense? She turned to the manager, who was still hovering by the table. Please remove him. He's harassing us. But the manager hesitated, uncertain how to proceed. Bernard's quiet authority usually went unquestioned, and the manager did not want to handle the situation in a way that might offend one of the cafe's most prominent clients. He looked to Bernard for direction. Bernard addressed the boy again. What exactly did you see, son? Malik took a breath. Every eye in the cafe was pinned to him. I saw her put something in your soup. She took a small vial out of her bag, like medicine or something, and poured it in while no one was looking. You shouldn't eat it. Please trust me. A wave of disbelief swarmed the onlookers. A few shook their heads. Others exchanged skeptical frowns. A cynical laugh broke from a table where a couple had been discreetly watching. Marissa seized that reaction, directing a sneer at Malik. You think you're a detective now? Maybe you want money, right? That's what this is all about, isn't it? Bernard raised a hand to silence them. Marissa, let him speak. The old man looked carefully at his wife. What is he talking about? You didn't touch my soup, did you? Of course not, she snapped. Bernard, this is ridiculous. Yet her voice trembled slightly. By then, a light sweat had broken out on Bernard's brow. His age made him prone to fatigue, and the stress was wearing on him. Still, he kept his composure, honing in on every subtle sign Marissa gave. Their relationship had been under strain for months. Although he was rarely home, always busy with board meetings and real estate deals, he had noticed an unsettling distance growing between them. Marissa's lips pressed into a thin line. Her eyes darted to the exit, calculating options. Bernard saw the flicker of panic flash across her face, and a terrible possibility began to form in his mind. He leaned back in his chair, feeling suddenly unsteady. Let me see your purse, Bernard said, trying to keep his voice calm. A hush fell again. Marissa stiffened, her fingers tightening around the handbag in question. You're listening to him? She gestured at Malik in disbelief. This is insulting. I can't believe you think I'd stoop so low. Bernard refused to back down. Then you won't mind letting me look inside. It was a line in the sand. The crowd collectively held its breath, uncertain whether to expect a meltdown or for Marissa to comply. Malik, standing just a few feet away, worried that at any moment the manager might drag him out, but the manager, just as caught in the tension, stood frozen. Marissa forced a steadying breath. Fine, she managed. She set the purse on the table and stepped back defiantly, her expression a mixture of anger and arrogance. Bernard reached over, rummaging through her neatly organized belongings. A designer wallet, makeup items, a cell phone, keys. For a moment, it seemed that Malik might have been mistaken. Then Bernard's hand froze. Beneath a folded receipt, he found a small vial, still containing traces of a clear liquid. The café erupted in gasps. Someone at a nearby table exclaimed, "Oh my God," while another fumbled for their phone. Bernard's hand trembled as he held the vial, turning it slowly. There was no label. Marissa looked momentarily stricken, her face betraying a flash of guilty terror before she tried to collect herself. "It's vitamins," she said, too quickly. "Bernard, you haven't been well. I was trying to help. By pouring something into my soup without telling me?" Bernard's voice rose, louder than anyone in the café had ever heard him speak. "What are you taking me for, Marissa?" In the swirl of confusion, the manager signaled another staff member. Whispers spread like wildfire among the café-goers. Some reached for their phones, either to film or to call the police. Marissa swayed on her feet, panic making her expression wild. Her plan was falling apart in full public view, a scenario she had likely never expected to face. Tears welled up in her eyes, but they looked more like frustration than remorse. She stammered through excuses that sounded increasingly desperate. Bernard's face remained ashen, unblinking in the face of her words. He glanced at Malik, the boy who had risked ridicule and ejection to speak the truth. Within moments, 2 uniformed police officers entered the café. Someone must have called them, perhaps a patron or a staff member. The tension climaxed as the officers approached, surveying the scene with practiced calm. Bernard's trembling hand still gripped the tiny vial. Marissa tried to speak, her voice jumping from pleading to defensive. But one of the officers gently interrupted, turning to the manager, then to Bernard, to piece together the story. In that crowded café, the improbable scenario of a homeless boy's courageous intervention came fully into the light. Bernard explained what had happened. Malik stood quietly off to the side, uncertain if the police would chase him away, arrest him, or treat him as a troublemaker. Instead, they took his statement too. Marissa's voice cracked as she denied everything, but her words sounded hollow. The presence of the unlabeled vial was damning, especially with a room full of witnesses. When an officer placed cuffs around her wrists, the facade she had built around herself shattered. The hush that fell over the Elman Porter was one of disbelief and solemn realization. Malik's warning had saved a man's life. The police escorted Marissa toward the door, reading her the standard rights. She hurled one final glare at Bernard, as though blaming him for the entire debacle. "I did it for us," she managed to hiss, eyes glinting with both despair and fury. Then she was gone, flanked by the officers, leaving the café in stunned silence. Bernard sank back into his chair. He was no stranger to crises. He'd faced business collapses, market crashes, and scandalous rumors. Yet nothing had prepared him for this. The woman he had trusted with his personal life had just been caught. apparently trying to poison him. For a moment, he felt eerily numb, as though the entire scene was a nightmare from which he was about to wake. Staff and patrons remained frozen, uncertain how to proceed. Some whispered condolences, others glanced awkwardly away. The manager asked Bernard if he needed anything: a doctor, some water, a place to sit privately. Bernard waved off the suggestions, wanting only a moment to steady his thoughts. His gaze shifted to Malik, who stood near the entrance, nervous about whether he was allowed to stay. Eventually, Bernard motioned for the boy to come closer. "Thank you," he said softly, his eyes wet with gratitude and shock. "You saved my life, and I'm sorry I didn't believe you at first." Malik let out a breath, relief flooding through him. "I wasn't sure anyone would listen." Bernard's features twisted with a remorseful smile. "I almost didn't." "But you didn't give up." The boy stepped back, uncertain. A staff member hovered, possibly considering if she should escort him out. Bernard noticed and gestured for her to let him be. Beneath the swirl of tragedy and betrayal, a quiet moment of connection formed between the old man and the homeless boy. In the hours that followed, the police took Bernard's statement in more detail. They confiscated the vial, calling in specialized units to test its contents. Initial indications pointed to a potent toxin. The discovery left Bernard reeling. What had gone so wrong in his marriage that Marissa believed murder was her only way forward? Questions stabbed at him. Had it been for his fortune? Had she grown tired of the public persona of being married to an older man? Or was there something else behind it? An affair, debts, blackmail? Bernard realized he might not get the answers anytime soon, if ever. Regardless, Marissa was facing an attempted murder charge, and the delicate veil of their relationship was forever ripped apart. Late afternoon sunlight angled through the café windows, illuminating the remnants of Bernard's untouched meal. Outside, New York's hectic pace never wavered. Cabs dashed, pedestrians hurried, and the city's heartbeat pressed relentlessly onward. Only inside the café did life seem momentarily suspended, as though everyone was still absorbing the extraordinary events they had witnessed. The manager approached Bernard gently, explaining that in the chaos, the lunch had never been paid for. Bernard offered his credit card, but the manager shook his head. "Please, sir, there's no charge after all you've been through. This is the least we can do." Bernard accepted with a quiet nod, though he insisted on adding a generous tip for the staff's troubles. Then he looked to Malik, who had drifted near the doorway, possibly eager to slip out and return to his uncertain existence. Bernard caught his eye. "Wait," he said. "Don't go yet." Malik paused, uncertain whether the old man intended to scold him, reward him, or something else entirely. The confusion on the boy's face was plain. Most of Malik's interactions with strangers involved suspicion or pity, rarely genuine gratitude. Bernard stood and slowly approached. He might have appeared frail or exhausted, but something in his eyes was resolute. "Malik, I'd like to talk to you for a moment, if that's all right." The boy nodded. A hush remained in the café, though some patrons began gathering their belongings or finishing their meals. Many cast lingering glances at Bernard and Malik, likely recounting the day's events in their minds. Some even approached the boy with a pat on the shoulder, uttering quiet words of praise which made Malik blush. He wasn't used to positive attention. Bernard guided him to a quieter corner. "I don't know anything about you," he admitted, "other than you just saved my life. How long have you been on the streets?" Malik shrugged, eyes downcast. "Couple of years, I guess. My mom passed away, and I got bounced around from place to place." He paused, swallowing the lump in his throat. "Didn't work out." I ended up on my own. Bernard's expression softened. I'm sorry to hear that. The older man considered the swirling mix of emotions in his heart. Moments ago, he'd been confronted with betrayal that could have cost him his life. Yet here was a boy he'd never met, stepping in to rescue him without a second thought. Wealth and status had not saved Bernard. The moral courage of a young stranger had. I don't want you to live like this, Bernard said at last, the weight of sincerity heavy in his voice. No child should. Let me help you. Do you have anyone? Family, friends, anyone you can turn to? Malik shook his head. Not really. Bernard exhaled, nodding. Then allow me to do something. I can't just walk away and leave you out there. Malik's eyes flicked up, surprise and uncertainty brimming within them. He'd heard plenty of false promises before, from well-meaning folks who offered a sandwich or a few dollars but never lasting help. Still, something about Bernard's quiet resolve felt different. Thank you, Malik said, his voice trembling with cautious hope. But are you sure? Bernard offered a tentative smile. Trust me when I say I owe you that and more. In the aftermath of the tumultuous incident, word spread quickly through both the news and social media circles. A wealthy real estate mogul, nearly poisoned by his young wife, saved by a homeless teenager's intervention. It was the sort of sensational story that tabloids devoured. Cameras flashed outside police precincts, while Marissa's lawyer demanded privacy on her behalf. Rumors swirled about potential motives, everything from life insurance payouts to secret affairs. Neither Bernard nor Malik had much appetite for the public circus. Instead, Bernard focused on fulfilling his quiet promise to the boy. Within days, arrangements were made for Malik to move temporarily into a small room in one of Bernard's properties. It was far from luxurious, just a modest studio apartment in a safe neighborhood. Yet to Malik, it felt like stepping into a different world. There was a bed with a clean mattress, a lock on the door, a working bathroom, and a small kitchenette stocked with groceries. Malik had barely set his tattered backpack down when he realized he might finally, after so long, sleep without fear of being attacked or told to leave. The first night, he half expected Bernard's generosity to evaporate. Instead, the older man showed up the next morning with an armful of fresh clothes and groceries, along with pamphlets about local schools and youth programs. I'm not trying to overwhelm you, Bernard said, watching the uncertainty flicker across Malik's face. Just want to give you every chance to move forward. Malik nodded, struggling to find the words for his gratitude. He was still unaccustomed to kindness from strangers, let alone a man as wealthy and influential as Bernard. The older man's demeanor had changed, too. The shock of betrayal had burned away his usual aloofness. Now, there was a gentler side to Bernard, one determined to find purpose beyond corporate boardrooms. The days that followed were a whirlwind. Police investigations unearthed evidence that Marissa had purchased suspicious substances online and made contradictory statements about her intentions. Bernard tried to avoid public statements, but the tabloids plastered his face everywhere. Juggling his business obligations alongside the emotional fallout of his wife's crime left him exhausted. Yet each evening, he found time to check on Malik. Over cups of hot chocolate, they shared a cautious sense of solidarity. Malik asked Bernard questions about his life, what it was like to manage huge buildings, how he made so much money, and why he hadn't noticed any warning signs about Marissa. Bernard tried to answer honestly, acknowledging the blind spots wealth could create. Money can solve a lot of problems, Bernard reflected one evening, sipping his drink at Malik's small dining table. But it also builds walls around you. You stop seeing what's real, and people stop telling you the truth because they're afraid it'll cost them something. Malik listened, absorbing lessons about a world he'd never known. In turn, Bernard learned about street life, about how shelters always ran out of beds, about older kids who terrorized younger ones for scraps. The more Bernard understood of Malik's reality, the more determined he became to help. Eventually, Bernard arranged for Malik to meet with a social worker he trusted, who guided them through the paperwork needed to officially get Malik enrolled in school. The boy resisted at first, worrying he was too far behind or that the other kids would mock him. But Bernard persisted with gentle encouragement. "You have a future," Bernard said softly, "and I'm here to make sure you find it." In court, Marissa's legal team tried various strategies to downplay her guilt. They claimed that she and Bernard had argued that morning and implied that the vitamin mixture was a misunderstanding. Lab tests proved otherwise. The substance in the vial contained lethal properties. Bernard followed the proceedings from a distance, preferring not to sit in the courtroom every day. He had entrusted his lawyers to handle it, and the evidence was clear. The day Marissa was convicted, the tabloids roared with the story. For Bernard, it was a relief tempered by sorrow. He wasn't heartless. He had genuinely loved her at some point. But people change. Greed, desperation, or resentment had transformed Marissa from a charming companion into someone who nearly ended his life. In the following months, Bernard focused on picking up the pieces of his personal life. He signed over some of his business responsibilities to capable partners, rediscovering that money and power were not the pillars he truly valued. Instead, he invested more time into philanthropic efforts, especially those benefiting youth homelessness. Malik became a central part of those plans. Bernard quietly financed programs to give other kids the same second chance he was offering Malik. The transformation in Malik was slow but steady. He showed up at school wearing new clothes, though he still had trouble trusting teachers and classmates. Day by day, though, his guarded demeanor softened. He found interests, an after-school basketball club, a workshop on digital design, and realized that for the first time, his future wasn't just about survival. Bernard and Malik would still meet at least once a week, usually at a café, though never the Elman Porter with its painful associations. Over shared sandwiches and coffee, they discussed small victories. Malik brought home improved grades. Bernard smiled more freely than he had in years. One crisp autumn afternoon, Malik pulled out a folded piece of paper and handed it to Bernard. It was a simple drawing. Stick figures in a diner, one adult and one kid. The adult figure had a speech bubble that said, "Don't eat that!" The kid figure stood triumphantly, arms raised. Bernard's eyes misted with quiet amusement and gratitude. "This is quite something," he said, carefully tucking the drawing away. "Thank you." They fell into a companionable silence. Nearby, traffic buzzed by, and the city's energy pulsed as always. But to Malik and Bernard, the world in that moment was just the two of them, sharing a bond forged in the strangest of circumstances. Finally, Bernard spoke. "Malik, you taught me something that day. You had nothing, no money, no power, but you had the courage to do what was right. I had everything, and yet I was seconds away from losing it all. Funny how that works, isn't it?" Malik nodded thoughtfully. "I guess doing the right thing doesn't cost anything, but it can change everything." Bernard gave a small smile, nodding in agreement. Then, as the sun dipped behind the skyscrapers, they rose from their seats and headed off to whatever the evening held. A sense of hope and renewed purpose coursed through both of them. Bernard had once believed his success story was about smart investments and market savvy. Now he saw a greater story, that real fortune lies in compassion and the willingness to stand up for what's right, even when no one else will listen. Malik's life, meanwhile, was no longer limited to the shadows of alleyways and the uncertainty of each dawn. He had found a champion in an old man who could have ignored him, and that partnership had led to a second chance that every child deserves. In a city known for its soaring skyscrapers and high-stakes deals, two unlikely allies had discovered the true nature of heroism. It was not a glamorous headline or a daring bank heist, but a quiet, determined act of intervention. A boy who risked ridicule saved a life, and an old man who lost faith in his marriage found hope in a new bond. Side by side, they walked away from the Elman Porter's dark memory, stepping into a future illuminated by a single brave act that changed both of their lives forever.